This is Plant-Based Briefing. Potatoes. What about diabetes, blood pressure, blood sugar, and more? Part 1 by Michael Greger, MD at nutritionfacts.org. And I'm Marian Erickson. This is the Plant-Based Podcast where I curate articles on plant-based and vegan living, get permission, and narrate them to you here in about 10 minutes or less every weekday. I'm pleased to have permission from Nutrition Facts to share their amazing content, but this article would have been longer than 10 minutes, so it's a two-parter. I'll read part 1 today and then tune back in tomorrow for the second half. And now let's get to today's plant-based briefing. Potatoes. What about diabetes, blood pressure, blood sugar, and more? Part 1 by Michael Greger, MD at nutritionfacts.org. There are so many ways we eat potatoes: baked, mashed, hashed, fried, scalloped, roasted, and more. But should we be eating them at all? Potatoes and diabetes. In 2006, the Harvard Nurses' Health Study, which had followed the diets and diseases of tens of thousands of women for 20 years, found that greater potato intake was associated with a greater likelihood of getting type 2 diabetes. But of the 100 or so pounds of white potatoes Americans eat every year, most are deep-fried and consumed as potato chips or french fries, and deep-fried foods are known to contain advanced glycation end products, or AGEs, which we know are unhealthful. Researchers have found that just 3 servings of french fries a week is associated with a nearly 20% greater risk of type 2 diabetes, whereas there was only a tiny associated risk with potatoes in general, including fries. There was still a diabetes link with mashed or baked potatoes, but people who eat more potatoes may eat more meat, and we know that animal protein is itself associated with increased diabetes risk. However, when researchers statistically adjusted for that, they still found an increased risk with potatoes. Looking deeper, butter and sour cream are often put on mashed and baked potatoes, but when researchers tried to adjust for those and other such dietary factors, as well as effectively looking at the ratio between plant and animal fats and whether potato eaters drank more soda or skimped on other vegetables, there still seemed to be a potato diabetes association. By 2015, Harvard researchers had also looked into other cohorts, including the all-male health professionals follow-up study to complement the all-female nurses study, and continued to find a small increased diabetes risk associated with baked, boiled, or mashed potatoes, though french fries appear nearly 5 times worse. The authors concluded that potatoes are considered to be a healthful vegetable in the dietary guidelines, though current findings cast serious doubts on that classification. Then in 2018, a meta-analysis published on potato consumption and risk of type 2 diabetes combined all 6 of the prospective studies that had been done to date and found about a 20% increase in diabetes risk associated with each serving of potatoes a day. The researchers concluded that long-term, high consumption of potato may be strongly associated with increased risk of diabetes. Does the story end there? If only there were a country where potato consumption was associated with a healthy diet. If potato consumption was still associated with diabetes there, then that would be concerning. A study out of Iran found that those eating the most boiled potatoes had only half the odds of developing diabetes. In Iran, not only is most of the potato consumption in the form of boiled potatoes, but those who eat potatoes have the healthiest diets and eat the most whole plant foods, such as fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and beans. The bottom line is we don't have convincing evidence to date that the intake of potatoes in general is linked to type 2 diabetes, but we should still probably hold the fries. Potatoes and high blood pressure. What about potatoes and hypertension and death? Harvard researchers found that individuals who on most days ate potatoes, baked, boiled, or mashed, and not just french fries and potato chips, appeared to be at a higher risk of developing high blood pressure. As mentioned above, salt and butter are often added to potatoes, but when they attempted to tease out the effects of salt and saturated fat, there still seemed to be a link between potato consumption and high blood pressure. Again, though, what about the meat in meat and potatoes? The same Harvard researchers found that meat, including poultry alone, appeared associated with an increased risk of hypertension, as did a moderate amount of canned tuna. So in the potato study, they endeavored to factor out any effects from the consumption of all types of meat, yet still found an increased risk of hypertension associated with potato intake. 2 similar studies performed in Mediterranean Europe did not find any association between potato consumption and high blood pressure, though. Perhaps this is because, in that area of the world, potatoes aren't typically smothered in butter and sour cream, and potatoes are often eaten with other vegetables. So, are potatoes bad for us? A primary reason we care about blood pressure is because we care about the consequences. In 2 studies done in Sweden, where they primarily eat their potatoes boiled, no evidence was found that potato consumption was associated with the risk of major cardiovascular disease. No relationship was found between potato consumption and risk of premature death in southern Italy either. In the United States, though, potato consumption has been associated with increased mortality, a 65% increased risk of dying from heart disease, a 26% increased risk of fatal stroke, a 50% increased risk of dying from cancer, and increased risk of dying from all causes put together. However, all of that disappeared after adjusting for confounding factors. In other words, it wasn't the potatoes at all. People who eat potatoes must just smoke more, drink more, or eat more saturated fat, for instance. Once all such other factors are considered, the link between potatoes and death disappears. This was confirmed in the NIH AARP study, the largest such study of diet and health in human history. If you just separate out the potatoes, researchers find that they are not associated with increased risk of death, with the possible exception of french fries, which are associated with an increased risk of dying from cancer. Put all the studies together, 20 in all, and no significant association has been found between potato consumption and mortality, though again, fried potatoes may be the exception. Even if eaten just twice a week, fries may double one's risk of dying prematurely, independently of other factors, but the consumption of unfried potatoes seem to be neutral. In terms of mortality, fried potatoes may not be as bad as fried meat, think fried chicken and fried fish, but that's not saying much. Other whole plant foods, nuts, vegetables, fruits, and legumes like beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils are associated with living a longer life and significantly less risk of dying from cancer, dying from cardiovascular diseases like heart attacks, and 25% less chance of dying prematurely from all causes put together. However, no such protection is gained from potatoes for cancer, heart disease, or overall mortality. So, the fact that potatoes don't seem to affect mortality can be seen as a downside. Remember, though, that potatoes aren't like meat, which may actually actively shorten lifespan. But there may be an opportunity cost to eating white potatoes, since every bite of a potato is a lost opportunity to eat something even healthier, something that may actively enhance our lifespan. So, potatoes are kind of a double-edged sword. The reason that potato consumption may just have a neutral impact on mortality risk is that all the fiber, vitamin C, and potassium in white potatoes might be counterbalanced by the detrimental effects of their high glycemic index. Not only are high glycemic impact diets robustly associated with developing type 2 diabetes, but current evidence suggests that this relationship is cause and effect. You just listened to Potatoes, What About Diabetes, Blood Pressure, Blood Sugar, and More? Part 1 by Michael Greger, MD at nutritionfacts.org. And I'm Marian Erickson, your host. Tune in tomorrow for the second half of this episode, where you'll hear about the potato glycemic index, whether or not potatoes spike our blood sugar, and how to reduce the glycemic impact of potatoes. So please share this episode with anyone who might benefit, and thanks for listening.